Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. So my colleague Atalaya Tasu and myself would like to welcome you to the INSEAD Business Sustainability Series from the INSEAD Hub in San Francisco. So I don't need to convince you, sustainability is a very important topic, and at INSEAD we take it very seriously. So you may know that we're transforming the MBA program to include sustainability in many courses. We launch executive programs, we do research, and now, of course, we're also launching this series that we're starting today. So what is the purpose of the series? It is basically to enable, to inspire discussions and action on how we can align sustainability and sustainability demands of society with business objectives and imperatives. So we're very happy with the interest that you've shown. So we have 50% more registration than we normally have for similar events. So thank you for your interest. Let me give a little bit of an overview of what the series is all about. 5 events. There are 4 webinars, and the last one is an in-person event. The first one today, it's all about what we call masterclass and master cases. It basically says, what do we know? How do we do it? June 8th, second event, it's a panel on what? Sustainability is still very different around the world. What are the trends? What do we expect in terms of impact on business? And what are the opportunities for business? September 28th, we're going to have a clinic on a company where we have the 2 co-founders of EcoVadis who are going to give a clinic for an hour on how do you start a business that is inspired by sustainability? How do you scale it to become a global company? Number 4, it is going to be your time. We're going to invite you to submit your sustainability-related business projects, and we're going to give you a platform to show what you're actually doing, and so to create an opportunity for discussion. And 5, so this is going to be an in-person event at the Hub here in San Francisco, where we're going to celebrate your creativity when it comes to sustainability. So what are we going to do? We're going to awards or give 2 awards. One is going to be the INSEAD Business Sustainability Award for companies that were created, so built for sustainability, so startup, new companies, etc. And the other one is going to be for companies that were rebuilt for sustainability. In other words, established companies that are changing their business model to address sustainability demands. We're also going to have keynote speakers. So these are the 5 events, and I hope I can welcome you on each one. Okay, so what's happening today? Today, we're looking at the question of sustainability as a strategic opportunity. I will give a masterclass, which is, of course, going to be very short, roughly 20 minutes. And then I'm going to be very anxious to turn over the floor to 2 distinguished alumni, Georgina, originally from Argentina, MBA 99, who today is the Director of Environmental Excellence at the Olympics, Paris 2024. She has a lot to share on how they make the game sustainable. And then second distinguished speaker is Stéphane Germain, who is from Canada, who is the CEO of the company that he created himself. It's called GHGSat, Greenhouse Gases and Satellites. I'm not going to say more. It's a very remarkable company. And so I handpicked both speakers, and I'm very thankful that both were willing to actually do the presentation. So that is coming our way in the next hour. Without much further ado, I will get started, except one thing. So, of course, you may have questions as we go through the material. You've submitted questions already. Please continue to submit. And so at the end, I think we should have time to address some of those questions here. All right, so let me get started with the masterclass. And I started by saying, what do we know? It's a little bit arrogant, of course, because there are so many perspectives on sustainability. I take a very narrow strategy economics perspective on this. And I would like to start with a quote from the CEO of Danone, Antoine de Saint-Affrique. He was a CEO before of Barry Callebaut. And he was expressing something that we now see in so many companies. And what are we seeing? A lot of enthusiasm to really do something about sustainability. Employees are enthusiastic, executives are enthusiastic. They're missing a little bit the tools and the frameworks. And so what do we see happening? A lot of initiatives, but a lot is not really adding up to a lot of big stuff. And so what he is saying is, if you want to have a big impact, it got to make economic sense. So that's really what he is saying. And I subscribe also to this particular view. But what exactly does that mean? Okay, what makes economic sense? Well, many of you have been to INSEAD, and for about a year, you've discussed a lot of stuff to make sure that what you do makes economic sense. And very quickly, so I'll take you back to the benches. If you forgot what we did there, and to go through one tool that we discuss very, very often is when you face a new opportunity, regular or sustainability inspired, what do we take into account? And so whether you're selling Teslas or you're selling sustainability inspired tomatoes, what do we know? There's a huge difference in the willingness to pay, which we map out on the vertical axis. Second thing that we know, of course, is people are very different. And so there are some people that even if price is zero, they're not going to touch tomatoes because they're allergic to it. Or for that matter, if price is zero, I'm not getting into a Tesla. I really don't like this particular car. And so those 2 points determine what you call the demand function, of course, that you probably remember. What is the horizontal line? Well, there is a cost associated with growing and selling tomatoes or making and selling cars, what we call the cost to serve a customer. And then, of course, the job is starting. At what price are we selling? You remember the drill. I don't need to go into detail on this, but what do? We're trying out various different prices, okay? And so we expect different quantities, expecting different profits, and we pick the one that has the highest profit. So in other words, what do we try to do? Either by trial and error or by mathematics, we're trying to find out what is the profit maximizing price. So what was Monsieur de Saint-Afrique actually saying? He's saying sustainability is coming around, and what is going to be the impact on our profit maximizing picture that we know so well? Well, how is it going to influence this? Okay, we don't really know. How is it going to influence the demand curve? And if we don't know this, what is it that we don't know? We don't know what's actually going to happen to this one. But we know what we actually want. We want this triple win. And what is the triple win? The triple win is going to work out for society, it's going to work out for customers, and it's going to work out for the company. How on earth do we do this? And so my colleague Atalay is saying there's a lot of ambiguity, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of things that we don't know. And so how do we navigate this particular ambiguity? And 3 stories that I would like to go through in rapid succession, high level, with one example, as a matter of fact. So much more can be said, but I will stay very, very brief on this. First discussion that I would like to get into is the issue of costs. And so very often we assume that with sustainability, costs are going to go up. Oh, it's new costs, it's compliance, it's just going to go up. I will take a little bit of a contrarian view here, and I'm going to make the point that no, not really. Sustainability and cost reduction can go very well hand in hand, provided, okay? And so I'll get into this, okay? And so if we can do that, okay, problem solved, because if we can have lower costs and sustainability inspired actions, of course, what are we waiting for? How would this work, as a matter of fact? Let me take you to Istanbul, beautiful Istanbul, take you to the Bosporus. And so you see all kinds of ferries there. Maybe you've been on one of these, and maybe you had the pleasure of getting the smoke in your face. Of course, this is not just in Istanbul. There are 50, 60,000 ships like that cruising the high seas that do exactly the same thing, emitting a lot of CO2, of course. Why do we still have these boats? And answer I get very often is, it's the most economical way of transporting fossil fuels. So, well, maybe not. Let me introduce you to a new type of boat, and it's called Ellen. It's an e-ferry. And what is this ship all about? It's cruising on the Baltic Sea, not exactly small distance, 22 nautical miles, which is what? It's 40 kilometers, 25 miles. Interestingly, it doesn't have a diesel engine. It doesn't have a backup diesel engine. It only has battery-powered engines. They have two of them. If one is not functioning, the other one kicks in, but no diesel generator, okay? Not exactly a small boat, as you can see the dimensions. It's cruising pretty fast. It's 20% faster than a diesel boat. And so when it gets to the other shore, it's being recharged by green energy. So, wow, that's pretty impressive. That's got to be expensive. What are you talking about, cost reductions? Let's take a look at the economics of that particular boat. And so horizontal axis, you see the number of years that the life of a boat. Vertical axis is what? It's the total cost of operation. Includes the investment cost and the cost to operate that particular boat. Two lines important. The black one is a diesel ferry, and the green one is Ellen, the electric ferry. When you look at it, very quickly, what do you see? We see that, of course, those diesel-based boats are the least expensive to buy. They're produced in big numbers. They have been around for a long time, economies of scale. When you look at the electric ferry, what you see, it's roughly 25–30% more expensive than the diesel ferry. However, when we look over time, what do we see? Those diesel boats, as a matter of fact, when you look at the total cost in operation over 20 years, are becoming a lot more expensive than what? Than, of course, the electric ferry. Now, is the electric ferry less expensive or more expensive? Does it have lower cost or higher cost? Well, it all depends, doesn't it? If you have a horizon of 2 years, what are you going to conclude? I don't want a boat like that. I understand sustainability, but my costs are going to go up. But if you take a longer perspective, what are you going to say? No, as a matter of fact, the costs are going to go down. And so this is something that we see now in many sustainability-inspired cost reduction projects. It depends on the horizon. Yes, there is an investment cost, but if you take a long enough horizon, what are you actually going to see? That we can reduce the cost of operation. And this goes hand in hand with sustainability. For instance, when you look at steel and green steel that is going to go into cars, exactly the same story. When you look at electric equipment that is going into mines underground, exactly the same story. And so can cost reduction and sustainability go hand in hand? Of course it can. Now, where is the triple win? I hear you saying. Well, the triple win is what? Number one, as a matter of fact, we're saving a ton of CO2 when we go in this direction. As a matter of fact, we're not saving a ton, we're saving 2,520 tons per boat. Okay. What is the win for the customer? Well, of course, we love it. Smog-free, quiet, nice cruise. And so what is the third win? Of course, as a company, if you go into this direction, what do you get? You get, of course, also lower cost and better results. So can this go hand in hand with sustainability? Of course it can. Okay. And so here we have one story where we say, well, there is an economic logic to cost reduction and sustainability. Now, of course, we all know it. It's going to happen. And what is going to happen? Giving a talk in 2 weeks to a company that is in dairy business, selling yogurt, for instance. And what are they telling? They're telling, well, we're having those plastic pots that are thrown away. It's a disaster for society. Very expensive. What else? It comes from milk with cows. There is methane. So there is another cost. And so we need to address this. And we know costs are going to go up. Now, they're not very excited about that because, of course, if that is the case, what are they going to see? Profits are going to go down. Now, when would this actually make sense for them? And you remember that from your discussions at INSEAD, this would, as a matter of fact, work out if we can really generate more demand, because then we really are going to be making some very good results. All nice and well, but what does this really assume? It assumes that we can create what? Two effects. Vertical axis, somehow we need to be able to create this willingness to pay effect on existing customers. Some of our existing customers must be seeing a proposition that they're willing to pay more for. horizontal axis, it means what? We have people that said before, I hate tomatoes. Somehow they warm up to eating tomatoes. Or they said, I hate Tesla. Somehow they warm up to really buying a Tesla. How does it really work? How do we get these new customers in? Not easy stories, but we can do it. And so let's just quickly look at the first one in what is this all about. It's what we call this willingness to pay creation. To frame it, it's very reminiscent of what happened 20 years ago when organic food was coming to the market. So you had some people, and my nephew that was living with us in Chicago was one of them. They were willing to drive 40 kilometers, 25 miles from Chicago to Wisconsin to go to a farmer's market because there they could find organic tomatoes and organic corn. They were willing to pay a lot. Of course, they didn't count the CO2 emissions, but there were those people that were willing to pay a lot. Simultaneously, what did we know? There were some people who couldn't care less about organic tomatoes because they couldn't care less about tomatoes. And so the point on the horizontal axis is not changing. So if we can create a demand effect like this, would this actually work if we have a sustainability inspired story? Answer is yes, it would. Okay. But how do we actually do this? In Attila and myself, we're doing quite a bit of work on this. And there's just one story I would like to share with you. And it's a story that we're writing a case study on a company called Eastman. You may remember Eastman Kodak, okay, was split up from Kodak. And so now it's called Eastman. Let's go back to the years 2000. As a matter of fact, 2008, there was a lot of concern in many countries around the world about BPA. And so what was the story all about? We had baby bottles. And so what was the difficulty? It had synthetic estrogens. Now, when research was done, what is the impact of this? What were they discovering? Very low doses of BPA exposure gets you to cancer, impaired immune functions, early puberty, obesity, everything that doesn't look good. Panic in the disco, of course. And so immediately what was happening, we were looking for alternatives to what? To this polycarbonate. Eastman raised its hand and said, we have something that has all the good characteristics of what we had, and it doesn't have BPA. Very quickly. So we had a switch over. Baby bottles were using this Triton, as it's called. Camelback was using Triton. Hospitals were using blood transfusion equipment with us, etc. Very fast switch over. Now, this is not sustainability the way we talk about it right now. It's a substitution of a bad chemical with a good one. Where is sustainability coming in? It's an amazing story. It's a story of trying to renew. And so what is this company doing since 2020? Soon doing in France with huge new plants also. Rather than using only virgin material, what are they doing? The carpets that you maybe are sitting on, maybe that you're standing on, stuff that is bound to go to landfills. So what are they doing? He said, give it to us. And what are we doing? We can actually break down this material that is going to go into landfills. We can break it down to what? To the essential building blocks. They reconstruct it, and they reconstruct the chemical that is, as a matter of fact, Triton. So they call it Triton Renew. And so what can be done with this? They can actually sell it and again make those products. Who is interested in these products? And so here you see publicity of Camelback, and what are they saying? Oh, listen to us. Our Camelback bottles are made with what? This innovative plastic that utilizes 50% recycled material, less fossil-based resources, of course. So what is the willingness to pay story here? What we see is that when Triton came out, it was selling at 35% more expensive than the polycarbonates. Triton Renew is adding 10 to 20% to the premium that we had already before. Why is that? Well, because of course, Eastman is solving quite a number of problems. Number one, it helps Camelback decarbonize its products and its supply chain. Number two, it helps the customer of Triton. Okay. And so as customers, we're concerned about what we're buying. And certainly there are some of us who say, I really love the environment. I will buy those bottles which have a much smaller footprint than what we actually had before. Where is the triple win in all of this? Okay, the triple win in all of this is what? Number one, the environment. We clean up landfills, stuff that is going there. Number two, the Triton that is made from 50% recycled material has a 25% lower CO2 emissions. Okay. Number three, as customers, we solve pain points for our customers. Number four, of course, what else do we see? We see that the results of Eastman are very attractive. And so here, what do we see? We see now, as a matter of fact, very often, very interesting stories where companies look at what are the pain points of their customers. Can we solve those pain points? Very often, it's all about decarbonization. Okay, and so if we can do this, we can construct a story that helps customer with a higher willingness to pay. Steel companies, for instance, today are selling green steel, 25% green steel to car companies. They're getting a premium of 15 to 30% for that. Why is that? Because, of course, it helps car companies decarbonize their product. And so because they get this help, there is a higher willingness to pay. And so can sustainability-inspired innovation and higher willingness to pay go hand together? Of course it can. Many stories, but what is the point, of course? It cannot be greenwashing. It got to be real problem solving that we get into, as we see here, one particular example. Last story, and I'm anxious to hand over to our distinguished speakers here, but I need to raise this. And so what is the third economic logic that we see that can go hand in hand with sustainability? It is all about what? It's about what we call market creation. So this vertical point, what does that mean? It's going to happen. We see it already in the car market. Tesla needs to cut its prices. And so this premium is disappearing because more competition is coming in this market. If that happens and costs are higher, how do we get out of this pickle? Can we do that? And the answer is yes, okay, but we need to create bigger markets. Now, when we do this, there are typically two issues. There is a macro issue. How do we put the sustainable option in place? Think about charging stations for a car. Think about offshore wind power in terms of electricity generation. Second issue is all about what? How can I convince customers to switch to the Tesla car? How can I convince customers to buy green energy rather than fossil-based energy? Many issues that we can talk about, but we're very fortunate. Stéphane, as a matter of fact, has done both. It's not easy, but we got best practice. And so rather than me talking, I would like to hand over to him and explain what he has done in this. Before I hand over, however, I would like to step back and say, can sustainability and the demands of society and the imperatives of companies go together and do something big? Can it make economic sense? The answer is absolutely yes. But what do we need to understand? We need to follow a particular logic. And for some of you, cost reduction will be the thing that makes economic sense. For others, it's going to be willingness to pay creation that is going to make economic sense. And for yet others, it is going to be market creation. Whatever it is that is making sense, you got to have a plan. You got to have a strategy. And so certainly ways of aligning sustainability and economic logic. We're fortunate that we have those two speakers, and I didn't announce it, but of course, Georgina is also going to talk about cost reduction. But at this moment, I'm anxious to hand over to our speakers. And Georgina, if you're ready to hand over, to take over, I'm going to let you start your story, okay? As I said already before, Georgina heading up sustainability at the Olympics. Thank you. Please, I hand over to you.
Thank
Tell us
you.
a little bit about the scope of all of this, of what you're doing at the Olympics and the challenges that you're facing.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Karel. Thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts today. The Olympics and Paralympic Games in Paris in 2024, we are in less than 500 days away from it. And a few years back, we set for these games very ambitious targets in terms of sustainability. Hopefully, what I will be sharing with you is complementary to what Karel was saying, to what you were explaining. We talked a lot about making economic sense, talked a lot about making ecological sense. And this is why for those games, we like to say that we're making economic sense, you know, because somehow try to put two together. In one way, and I don't know if we can get to the slides, because
Yes, please, go ahead.
think this is going to help people realize what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't have control of the slides from where I am. So this big event is actually the world's biggest event. We're talking about 15,000 athletes, you know, more than 200. Oh, there we go. Great. So if we move to the next one, then you can get a picture of, you know, what the opening ceremony is going to look like. That's on the Seine, what some of the temporary venues are going to look like. You know, this is in the Eiffel Tower. There's a temporary, we're going to build a temporary stadium for 15,000 people. So again, imagine this sort of things and trying to do this in a sustainable way. So I was saying it's the biggest event in the world. If you move to the next slide, it's more than 200 delegations and more than 3 billion people are going to be watching this on TV. So again, the exposure is maximal. And this world's biggest event is facing humanity's biggest challenges. So somehow it became natural that this event should aim at being the most exemplary, or at least as exemplary as it can be. And also try to support, you know, and help contribute to moving into a more ecological transition or transformation, as we say it. In order to do that, basically, we had to reinvent the whole thing. I mean, it's a bit what you were saying, Karel. You know, we, of course, had to look for cost because we couldn't explode the cost. We had to actually rethink entirely how to deliver these games in a more sustainable way. And for that, we started with some very clear objectives, among which the most recognizable one is to reduce the emissions by 50% compared to previous games. So to be the first games to be fully aligned with the Paris Agreement, you know, is reducing the emissions, not in 2030, not in 2050, but in 2024, because this is, you know, after we're going to be gone, and then offsetting everything that was not going to be possible to reduce or avoid. So that is a really huge challenge. So, and you know, one of the big questions we get all the time is, how on earth are you doing it? You know, and this must be, you know, awfully expensive, and you know, of course, you're going to explode your budget as every Olympic and Paralympic Games do. You know, this is the sort of thing we're getting, but actually we're not. And one of the reasons why, as I said, is on one hand because we really took it to the understanding, you know, what were the levers, what were the ways in which we could reduce our emissions, in which we could turn this into a much more circular event. You know, there's a point in which sustainability and cost speak to each other very well, and that is frugality. You try to be more frugal, you try to do more with less, for example, right? And you know, as in your Ferry Island example, in our case, we're an event. So, you know, the games, we had to actually, as I said, change entirely the model.
So Georgina, I'm sorry to interrupt. If you want other slides, maybe you just should say, please go to the next slide.
Okay.
I see
so,
controlling them, yeah. Yeah.
Maybe we can go to to the next one. Well, this was intended to be like the sort of questions people are asking us all the time, and I don't trust you. Can you tell me more about that? So in terms of the objectives we have set for ourselves, and I think the audience may get the picture of how difficult this is. We're trying to secure carbon neutrality, protecting and regenerating biodiversity, developing a circular economy, bolstering resilience. All that applied to all the different things, all the different activities that are needed to actually deliver these games. The energy, the infrastructures, the mobility, the catering, the digital, the merchandising. So everything people know about, an event like this. And structuring all our program as to be as exemplary, as innovative. I mean, if you want to do things in a more sustainable way, you have to come up with new solutions, because otherwise you'll be just doing the same old thing, right? And of course, as I said, to use all this to leave a legacy so that these games will contribute to accelerate a transformation. Let me tell you a little bit more about those objectives that I was talking about. As I said, climate, huge focus on that, for one simple reason. The race to zero is the only race in which you only win if everybody crosses the line, right? So for us, it was very important that the Paris Games were aligned to the Paris Agreement. Today, we are doing it, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a moment, of how we actually go about it. Then infrastructures is one important choice. In order to reduce emissions, to reduce the use of materials, we're going with 95% of existing or temporary infrastructures. And that is major. We are only building one big new stadium, and a stadium that was needed. And in the way we are building that is actually using a lot of new technologies of low carbon constructions. Energy, 100% renewable energy, with 100% of the venues connected to the grid, as opposed to using diesel generators. And again, hopefully I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that in a moment. So one key to delivering all this, it's sourcing. It's actually what are the principles you put into your system so that everything that comes in lives up to those values and is helping you delivering all those objectives. In our sourcing system applies to 100% of our purchases, and every time we buy, we're screening for this. For example, the first criteria in our sourcing principle is circular economy. Basically, we're asking people, we want to buy chairs, but please propose to us not only your chairs, but also what to do with those chairs afterwards. And this is a way in which you increase the circularity of the whole thing, which for an event is quite a unique way of thinking, as opposed to just remaining linear. Stuff comes in, you use it, and then you just trash it, you bin it. So I will not go into all those details, but I want to deep dive a little bit in a couple of them, especially in climate. If you go to the next slide. Well, thank you. That was not meant to be the one. So as I said, we had this objective of reducing emissions by 50%. Very, very tough. In order to do that, we had to start by understanding what our emissions are, what the emissions of the games are. You cannot change what you don't understand. And this is why, even since the bid, we have made estimates. Instead of waiting until the end of the games to just offset whatever the emissions were, we said, well, we're going to start estimating where the emissions would come from, make very important structural decisions in order to reduce and avoid emissions. And when I was telling you that 95% of our places either exist or are temporary, this helps us slash emissions in a very significant way. We have also, as I said, made decisions on the energy being 100% renewables, on the food. We're serving 13 million meals, and of those 13 million meals, we're serving it with half of the carbon weight compared to the normal average meal in France. So all that to say, thank you. This is securing the carbon neutrality. Yes, this is, as I was saying, we think we can get along with about 1.5 million tons for this when compared to 3.5 million tons, which was on average what London and Rio emitted, which is the last two editions of the games that actually had public, last one being Tokyo, in which unfortunately due to COVID, spectators were not allowed. So it's very hard to compare. In our program, as I said, working very hard to reduce, to avoid, and then we already created another program of offsetting, which is up and running. The projects are up and running. So we didn't wait until the end of the games. We are already running those offsetting programs, one internationally, another one in France, to increase the contribution to the climate agenda with very important projects all over the world, respecting the universality of the games. One question again I get very often is, okay, oh, that's all nice, but on a daily basis, how you go about it? And actually, one very important, very useful way of handling this has been to put together a budget. If we move to the next one, we created a carbon budget. So everyone knows in the organization what they can spend in terms of money, but they also know the amount of tons of carbon they are somehow allowed to emit. This is based on the base estimates. We've done this since the bid, and ever since we've been on a yearly or biannual basis, we've been recalculating this, as you do with a financial budget, as to understand how things evolve, whether we are on track, and also, more importantly, how we can help all different functions of the games in addressing those targets, and if they can be reduced even further, that's great. So this is, this takes a lot of our daily activities dealing with this carbon budget. It has helped us also communicate on the responsibilities. As I said, you cannot change what you don't understand. You cannot change what you can't measure. And this has been a very interesting way of communicating responsibilities with people who are not necessarily familiar with the notion of carbon emissions or even the importance. In our case, more than half of our emissions are not under our control because as spectators coming by plane, as the permanent constructions, we build very little, but it waits, and effectively we can only either control or have a say on less than half of our emissions when you take this full scope 3 as we decided to take. So again, just to wrap it up on the climate, fixed a very ambitious target, made very important and structuring decisions early on to cut emissions and reduce, worked all through these years to reduce emissions further and contain the explosion of emissions, and monitor all that through this carbon budget, through a special software. We created our own equivalent to an SAP of carbon that allows us to control this every year, and then work hand in hand in finding new solutions to address all these issues throughout all these years. So this is on carbon, quick snapshot on this. There's been another important issue for us, and that is our circularity, as I was saying. Maybe we can move to the next slide. Again, same logic. You cannot change what you cannot measure, so started setting very ambitious goals and understanding all of the resources that are needed to deliver these games. The game is like a huge party. So when you add up all the things that are needed to deliver that party, it's a lot of materials. But that calculation had never been done before. This is an innovation of Paris 2024. So basically, we made this whole list, this estimate of every little thing that is needed, from the tons of cement needed to construct the temporary infrastructure, all the way to the tennis balls that will be used in Roland Garros. Everything was counted. So it just lets you imagine how the Excel looks like. Is big and painful, but it has been extremely useful to understand. First of all, how to reduce what comes into the machine, and then how to address the second life of everything that will go out of the machine once the party is over. So far, more than half of our resources have already found their second life. We're working on increasing that percentage. We're very confident it can be, there's still a lot more to be done. But again, the reason why we are confident is because we started working on this very early on and started putting conditions in our tenders. Every time anything comes in, we already think the second life of it when it will come out. So again, in a nutshell, another way of reducing not only emissions, but also the need for new and virgin resources. And the other example I wanted to share is around energy. Energy for us, it's an important topic. In terms of emissions, it's not enormous, but also for one reason, and that is because we decided to use renewable electricity and renewable gas. We need a little bit of gas, but everything is renewable. The innovation here is that we're using the grid, where events in general tend to be run on diesel generators. This was really new for many of us who were not coming from the events industry, and then changing this practice, installing new connections to the grid, securing secondary connections so that stadiums can use one grid, then a second grid in case the first one falls, and then only having the diesel generators as the backup. And actually we said, well, we can go further. Instead of having diesel generators, let's try to have new technology generators. So we launched call for tenders in 2019, and now we are testing those equipment. And hopefully, if everything goes well, in 2024, we will be having generators that are not running in diesel. So if things go well, we should be the first games to be zero diesel for electricity. Just as a comparison, in London, there were 4 million liters of diesel that were needed. That's the equivalent of about 200 trucks full of diesel that were burned just for electricity. So again, this is in a nutshell, some of the examples of how you actually go from, having the idea, having the ambition of reducing emissions and being more circular, protecting nature, and then turn it into a real deliverable every day. So off to you, Karel, if you want.
Thank you so much, Georgina. I'm sorry for a little bit for the slide and the issues with the slides here, but it's just a wild story on how we can make an event that is so huge to dare actually say, well, we're going to make them sustainable. You've shared with us already so many more details, but what you were able to share right now is the big picture, and then the ambitions and the specific examples. Hopefully, it shows the audience already what can be done, even with very complex projects. I would like to thank you so much again, Georgina. I would like to turn over the floor to Stéphane. And Stéphane, maybe if you can share your slides from where you are, so then you can control everything. That's going to be easier than if we have to do it. Okay.
Happy to do it, and I just need to get access to be able to share my slides now. I think you have to stop sharing the ones you have there. There we go. All right, here we go. So thank you very much for the opportunity, Carol. I'm really happy to be here today with everybody. And I would like to maybe just start by addressing probably the elephant in the room, which is how the heck do you come up with an idea to do satellite monitoring of greenhouse gas emissions? And, you know, the short version of this is that I always had a passion for space and I had a passion for environment. And really, there was a unique opportunity that came to be in the 2010 timeframe to put the two of them together and really, as I like to say, bring space down to Earth and apply satellite technology and space technology to the benefit of everybody here on the ground. And that's really what GHGSat's all about. So why don't I just dive in and tell you a bit the story about GHGSat and what we do, and through that, then obviously explore a little bit some of the questions Carol was asking earlier about willingness to pay, expanding the market, and so on. So GHGSat, what we do is we use our own satellites to monitor greenhouse gas emissions from industrial facilities around the world. And that means we monitor coal mines, landfills, oil and gas facilities, even some natural sources, like things like mud volcanoes. I didn't even know these things existed before we started doing satellite monitoring of greenhouse gas emissions. So we do it from space. First and foremost, we invented a technology that allowed us to do this from space. But we took the same sensor and we put it on an aircraft so that we can offer the service at two different levels. Again, in this theme of expanding the market. And then we also combine that with data from the ground. So the ability to not only be able to detect the emissions, but attribute them to individual sources. And then finally, we layer on analytics. So it's converting the data from just information or something that's interesting about emissions in various places around the world into trends, patterns, insights, so that our customers really get extra value out of the data that we're generating in the first place. All right, so what does this look like? What you're looking at here is a picture of the surface of the Earth in Central Asia. And it's a desert kind of environment, so the colors are kind of sandy. And you see some white lines and some white squares, and what you're looking at there is oil and gas facilities. And with the human eye, you really can't see anything. This doesn't look very spectacular. But when you overlay methane as detected by our sensors, you get a very different picture. So methane, it's invisible, there's no odor, and really it takes a specialized sensor to be able to detect methane in the wild. And that's what you're seeing here. And so you see several different sources. So some of these are compressor stations, some of these are pipeline leaks, some of these are what are called unlit flares, lots of different technical sources of oil and gas emissions. And we took this as a composite over time. So there's multiple different days shown here. So the wind is blowing in different directions, which it leads to the star type of pattern that you're looking at here, where there's multiple emissions coming from the same source on different days. And the higher concentrations are shown in red and yellow, and then decreasing concentrations in sort of the greens and blues. So really, this just shows a huge opportunity for methane reduction in this one particular oil and gas facility. And you know, maybe to provide a bit more context, there are two primary greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide and methane. We measure both. We've decided to start with methane because it is the more difficult problem for a lot of industrial operators. And therefore, when we are able to identify the methane like this, we can work with the operators to help them understand how to better control and reduce those emissions. So you can manage what you measure. So when you then extrapolate that to what we can see in other parts of the world, and in this case now, just use North America as an example. With the satellites we have in orbit now, we have 9 of them in orbit now. We actually have roughly half of the world's fleet of satellites for monitoring greenhouse gases are run by GHGSat now. And we took over 1 million facility measurements in North America in 2022. And within that, all those measurements, we found about 500 sources that are what are called super emitters. So really, really big sources of methane. And what's really shocking about that is, well, not only is that a lot of methane and obviously significant climate impact, it's also about 1.5 to 2 times more methane than is being self-reported to the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States. So in other words, the so-called top-down measurements from satellites looking down at the Earth are reporting about 1.5 to twice as much as is being estimated or calculated by taking all the assets and adding them all up, bottom up. And that leads to an important discrepancy because everybody then wants to know, well, which should we be using for our baseline and what are we measuring ourselves against as we try to improve? So it's a bit of a conundrum right now across all greenhouse gas monitoring, how we're going to reconcile the top down to the bottom up and make sure we have the right numbers. All right, so what? Why is that all useful and how do you make a business out of this? Well, the first and most obvious reason this is important to people is because they can make money by finding their methane instead of venting it to the atmosphere, selling it. Because methane is the primary constituent of natural gas. And natural gas, of course, is a sellable commodity. And depending on the period and supply and demand and security crises and energy crises, it can actually be very valuable. And so in this, at the one particular time that this particular case study was written, we were working for an operator who asked us to go look at a facility in a place called the Permian Basin in the United States, which is in West Texas. And if you remember what I told you as an example before, looking at a background image of the Earth here with methane overlaid on it, and each one of those white dots is an oil and gas facility. It's just a ridiculously dense operating environment in the Permian Basin. Being able to find which facility is emitting is very important. And then being able to find out why it's emitting it and figuring out how to fix it is the next step. So this particular customer asked us to look at their facility. And when we told them, well, we found a leak, they said, your leak is not right. It's way bigger than what we would have expected. So we went and measured it again and said, actually, that's what it is. So finally, they agreed to go back and take a look at the ground measurements and confirmed that, in fact, our measurement was correct. And they realized that the facility as built was not as designed. In other words, when they built it, they forgot to put a few parts in it that would have reduced the overall emissions. And it turns out that a roughly $100,000 repair would allow them to retain more gas for sale and generate approximately $3.6 million per year in extra revenue. So that's a pretty compelling business case, and this particular customer really loves us now. But on top of the additional revenue, obviously there's a fantastic climate impact. For every ton of methane that you can mitigate, it's equivalent to mitigating about 80 tons of carbon dioxide because of the shorter term impact of methane on global warming. So there's a really big quick win here in being able to do these kinds of projects with customers and helping them mitigate their emissions. But it's not just about immediate profits and selling more methane. The other reason why people care is that increasingly supply chains are requiring that suppliers understand their footprints and in some cases actually commit to reducing their carbon footprints over time. So for example, we were talking to an aluminum can manufacturer a couple of weeks ago who told us that for the first time, they have been told by their end customer that they must have quantified their carbon footprint and have a plan to reduce their emissions in order to win the contract in the first place. This isn't just some soft and fuzzy kind of code of conduct thing. This is a hard contractual requirement. And that's starting to be real now. And it's not just in aluminum cans. So that means more and more operators and suppliers have to really understand what their total supply chain is and where they're buying their power from, what jurisdictions they are building their various components in, the energy intensity of how they assemble their various components, and then even how they deliver them to their customers. So all of that has to be factored into their footprint. the finance world is increasingly also getting interested in properly measuring and therefore holding companies to a standard of reporting of their greenhouse gas emissions. So the IFRS and the International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB, is expected to come out actually this summer with some new regulations that will apply to publicly traded companies in Europe and ultimately in North America as well. And you see a blurb about the US SEC on the right, trying to impose rules in the United States, which may or may not succeed depending on the political environment. But regardless, there's a steady march towards, if for publicly traded companies and eventually for more privately traded companies or private companies as well, to have to be transparent about what your total emissions are, so that your investors really know what they're investing in. And that then in turn leads to things like insurance, and how they're deciding now to focus on projects that really have a clear footprint in order for them to even insure their projects in the first place, and to various regulatory initiatives such as the carbon border adjustment mechanism that actually just passed this week. So it's increasingly regulations are being applied both at national jurisdictions and across the European Union and across entire regions. So there are all these different factors coming into play that are changing the world of sustainability from just ESG metrics that frankly are generally a whole bunch of greenwashing to hard contractual requirements and regulatory requirements and financial trading requirements that really are moving our world from one of voluntary improvements in greenhouse gas emissions and environmental impact to one that's really a necessary part of business. So I'll maybe just conclude with this slide, which just to practically show you the kind of things that we can deliver. Most of our customers need to set baselines. I was just having a conversation with a customer that has facilities all over the world today. And the biggest challenge they've got is they've got facilities in Central Asia, in South America, in the United States, in Canada, in Southeast Asia. And in all of these places, they have to somehow set a consistent baseline across all the facilities, define the pathways about how they're going to reduce their emissions, and then manage and track against that to make sure that they're actually reducing their total emissions. And that's exactly what we do from a satellite. Satellites really provide a unique vantage point for doing that and for finding the largest emissions that allow the customers to then, prioritize where they're going to invest their efforts to reduce their emissions. So we provide both the maps and the detailed data via APIs and other formats so the customers can directly either visualize it or see it within their own systems. So that's it. Like it or not, climate is going to affect your business. I've shown a world here where climate is affecting business from a mitigation point of view. Climate is also going to affect most people's businesses from an adaptation point of view. And it's time for all of us to act. So just if you're curious what you're looking at here, this is a picture of one of our satellites being deployed about a week and a half ago from a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket at about 507 kilometers altitude. And yeah, that speed is correct, 27,000 kilometers per hour. So that's what a satellite looks like when it's being deployed in space. That one is GHGSat C8, named after the son of one of our team members named Gaspard. So Karel, over to you.
Thank you so much, Stéphane. I told you this is a very remarkable story and a very impressive story, just like, of course, the first story. And so thank you so much, Stéphane, for sharing all of this with us. And so we have only 1 minute left, but very quickly, why did you guys, so Stéphane was already saying, I care about technology, care about space. Georgina, why did you get involved with sustainability in the Olympics, just on a personal basis? So why? Tell us.
Well, honestly, how did I get involved with sustainability to start with? Honestly, it's a promise I made to my children that I would only work to leave them a better world. May sound totally simplistic, but actually it guided my entire career since they were born, and I've been only doing that. And when the opportunity to do this for Olympics came about, it's like a dream. You're trying to contribute in one way or another to make this huge event more special and leave a legacy for that. So how to say no to such an opportunity?
Thank you so
And
much.
if I could just add there, Carol, that's funny that's what motivates you, Georgina, and we name all of our satellites after the children of our team members for exactly the same reason.
So when I started this project with my colleague, I knew that among the INSEAD alumni, I would find creativity and brilliance, and I was not disappointed. So we're just sharing 2 stories right now, very important stories, and there are many more stories to come. I hope, and so we have to conclude this session here, but first I would like to thank both speakers for sharing their stories. There are, of course, so many other people that we have to thank for making this possible. Vic, the new director from the hub here, Isabel Finger, who is also an MBA alumnus, who has been helping me with this, and so many other people. But so I hope this first session was interesting, certainly inspiring, certainly to me. And I hope you're going to come back for the second session in a couple of weeks, which is going to look at sustainability trends around the world. I'm sure many of you have questions. Please key them in, and we're going to get back to you to the extent that we can. So, au revoir. Okay. And so, again, thank you for tuning in, and please come back next time.